Wonderful. So welcome everyone. My name is Margaret Brown and I am Chair of the City Planning and Management Division, and we welcome you here to our Director Dialogue series. We are very proud to be able to offer this series to you. I want to leave as much time for the conversation as possible, but I want to spend just a moment and tell you a little bit about what City Planning and Management Division of APA does. We may have some other programs that you might be interested in as well. So the mission of the City Planning and Management Division is to support public sector planners in the work that they do in cities across our nation. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do series such as this. We also provide financial grants to planners who are taking the AICP exam. In fact, just last week, we announced 7 new winners for grants to cover the cost of taking the AICP exam. So we do this every spring and fall. Keep an eye out. We've got a fall selection period coming up sometime soon. I guess we just did the fall. That's what the 7 were. So we've got spring coming up in the spring. We also financially support planners who are going to NPC, whether it's to actually go to the live or the internet only version of the conference. And so keep an eye out for that. And I also want to raise that we have just completed our first cohort of a mentorship program that the City Planning and Management Division does, and our second round will kick off later this fall. So keep an eye for, we're on Instagram and LinkedIn. Keep an eye out for our announcements of when we will look for, when you can sign up to be a mentor or a mentee for that new program. You can find us at city.planning.org. We have a LinkedIn presence, we have a YouTube presence, and an Instagram. We're easy to find just by looking for City Planning and Management. I want to welcome everybody, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it off to Lucas and Lauren and have them kick off the program.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And once again, as I've said on our past webinars, thank you for your leadership with our division. Thank you for being willing to kind of take on this new project of the Directors Dialogue series. I'm excited to continue to host this series from a new location now. My name is Lucas Raley, and I'm Director of Planning in McKinney, Texas, as of yesterday. So excited to be in a new city here and continuing on with this really incredible discussion series that we've started to give planning directors and those who hope to fill that role tools that you don't get in planning school. And so we're trying to cover these topics of personnel matters, things like that are really hard, a lot of the soft skills and things that are really important to the job, and be able to give everybody a network across the country that we can lean on, that we have people who we know we can ask questions of. And so we do invite you to engage as we go through. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to point you to the chat. There should be a link in there that everybody can see to register. Everybody will get 1 CM credit if you need that for AICP today, and the Q&A as well. I want to point that out. As we go through our discussion today, as you're hearing a presentation from Lauren, please be sure to ask questions live as we're going through in the Q&A, and we'll either get to you in the chat or I'll be able to kind of moderate and ask those questions back to Lauren once she finishes her presentation. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our speaker today. Lauren Miller has 18 years of experience across the US and Canada. She's a seasoned urban planning professional and graduate of the University of Waterloo School of Planning in Ontario. She's led government teams in long-range and current planning, overseeing development application reviews, land use enforcement, grant acquisitions, and key policy initiatives. Lauren specializes in zoning reform and process improvement, championing transparency through community engagement, public education, and stakeholder empowerment. She's passionate about mentoring the next generation of planner and is currently researching how Gen Z is reshaping the workplace. She also provides career guidance and mental health resources to support planners at every stage of their careers. Thank you so much, Lauren, for being willing to jump on with us today. And please tell us about Gen Z and how we can engage and be good leaders. And for those of you who are Gen Z, please give us the hot takes as we need them throughout this discussion.
All right, thank you, Lucas. Can everyone hear me? Yes, we're good to go. Okay, let's get this party started. So thank you so much for joining me today for the hot topic session that is Gen Z Decoded. As was noted in my bio, I've lived and worked on both sides of the border. So today I'm coming to you live and direct from Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is directly across the river from Detroit, which will also be the host city for MPC 26 next year. So that's also a little bit of a reminder. You've still got 4 hours to submit your proposal for MPC 26. So this has become one of my favorite topics to talk about, and it's become the topic that's kind of taking over my life, my dinner dates, my coffee breaks, my family gatherings, you name it. Everyone wants to talk about those darn kids. And I love getting people to see those darn kids through a different lens. I've been told my eyes light up when I talk about this topic, so I'm super excited and hope that you'll enjoy today's presentation. Now, this is going to be a very interactive session. We can't talk about Gen Z and it not be. So please have your phones nearby because we're going to be doing some polling shortly. Have your fingers ready on your keyboard and your mouse to share thoughts and comments as we go. I love to hear the dialogue. So by a show of hands, I won't be able to see, but some of you may have seen this session in Denver. If you did, whoop, whoop, thanks for coming back. It was super well received in Denver. We had a 4.8 out of 5 on our survey response. And I was also fortunate to present it again at the Canadian Institute of Planners National Conference this past July in Toronto. And coming out of that conference, I'm looking forward to presenting this information again this year and into the new year for some of our international colleagues in the UK, Australia, and as well as New Zealand. So this topic is hot. It crosses all borders and boundaries. And so we're going to dive into it today. So why Gen Z Decoded? Like, are they aliens? Do they speak another language? And the answer is yes and yes. No, they're not really aliens, but they are definitely coming from a different world than many of us previous generations have. So the genesis of the session came out of a conference session I did last year, which some of you maybe attend. I know Lucas attended, and maybe it sparked this conversation for the director's dialogue. The session was called Management Real Talk. And it was our intention was to have a session where we talked about the real skills that managers need the realities of being in a leadership role. And it basically turned into a group commiseration session of over 200 people. It was standing room only. People were sitting, leaning up against the wall. Like it was a vibe. And if you were there, you know it was. And so at the end of the session, a question was asked like, okay, manager friends, how are you dealing with these Gen Zs? And me and my two colleagues who were presenting kind of looked at each other like, well, we were having our own struggles with managing our Gen Z staff. And so we tried to crowdsource a response and it was crickets. So nobody knew what to do. And I took that as a call to action to take on a mini research project to find out what the experience was like for the Gen Zs coming into the workplace and hopefully use the experience that they've been having to take it back to my manager colleagues to help them be more supportive and be able to mentor them effectively. So we're going to dive into the key themes that came up during my interviews. I was actually able to interview Gen Z planners from across North America, so both Canada and the United States. I didn't get anyone from Mexico, but if you know anybody, tell them to call me. And I can admit, I came into the research biased based on my own experiences with Gen Z in the workplace, leaving in the middle of the day for yoga class and not telling anybody, yeah, that happened, that was real. But after talking to them, I can say that I have been converted and I am now self-proclaimed Gen Z advocate and auntie guardian. So let's just be clear as we're jumping into this topic, we're talking at the population level. So kind of generally, We're acknowledging that there's going to be divergence in experience for this generation based on a host of factors. So race, culture, gender identity, socioeconomic status, and geography, just to name a few. So today's conversation is ultimately a starting point for you with the Gen Zs that you interact with. But disclaimer, there's going to be a lot of self-reflection associated with this conversation and a lot of talk about feelings. So if feelings is not your usual bag, get ready. This discussion is going to get you thinking about who you were as a kid and who you are now, and where you were, what you were told, what opportunities you were afforded or not afforded, and how that has shaped you as a person as well as a leader, and how it informs the expectations that you now have of your staff. You're going to hear things that run contrary to the norms maybe you experienced when you were coming into your career, and some of it may make you bristle. And when that happens, what I need you to do is to ask yourself where that feeling is coming from, because the answer is likely very deep and telling about where you've been and where you are as a person right now and as a planner. Then I need you to ask yourself, what happens if you're not willing to adapt to the needs and expectations of the next generation? Where does that leave you, and where does that leave your organization? Ultimately, the tensions across the generational divide in its simplest form is a values mismatch. So I will be affirming some of your experiences today as a manager colleague that have brought you to this session. But this session it will challenge you to get curious about the values that are driving Gen Z, and that those values, spoiler alert, actually connect back to you. So you are much more connected to this next generation than you may even realize. So if you leave the session with nothing else, the lesson is simple. You've got to talk to your people, and that's Leadership 101. That it's including your Gen Zs. Yes, they're probably at the lower end of your hierarchy if you're a director or manager in a leadership role, but you will be a better leader when you understand what motivates your people, particularly the people you might feel you have the least in common with, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. So if you have your phones handy, please scan that QR code at the top. We're going to do a bit of a who's who in the room. And that will really help us to frame the conversation that we're having on Gen Z. So I'll give you a couple seconds, scan that QR code. I'm going to go ahead and do it with you so that I can play along, because I love a game. And we'll get this party started. So first question. Oh, it looks like I'm logged out. How is that possible? Well, this is strange. Let's try that again. Always a technical difficulty happening. So we're gonna see if we can correct this momentarily. Just give me a second. Nope, not working. Okay, that's okay. Life happens sometimes. So couple things that we want to take into consideration. Let's see if it'll let me at least advance. There we go. So let's talk about who is Gen Z. So they are the group of people who were born between the year 1997 and 2012. So this year, they are turning the ages of 28 to 13. And so for the sake of this conversation, we're really going to be talking to the top end of the cohort, because quite frankly, the majority of the generation is still in school. So it's a very small group of people who are actually in the workforce right now. They're the first generation to never know a world without the internet. And so the world has always been at their fingertips. And so in doing this research, it's made me think of little life lessons that I learned doing things that maybe Gen Z hasn't had to do. So for example, after school, sometimes I would get to go to the library. And it was a milestone when I got to go to the library by myself. But now Gen Z's library is right here on their phone. So imagine, just take into consideration the things that you did as a kid that now Gen Z doesn't have to go far or have any real experience because it's right in the palm of their hand. It's also worth noting that Gen Z is more educated and racially diverse than the previous generations. So diversity is not foreign to them. Even if their immediate environment is not diverse, they have an awareness of the world beyond their own around their own surroundings, particularly after the introduction of social media. And finally, the values that this generation is bringing to the office are slightly different than the ones of previous generations. So they value flexibility, authenticity, and a pragmatic approach to problem solving, which was a bit different than what I was expecting. So we're going to explore what these values look like in the workplace. So we're going to cover three main topics. The first of which is the plight of Gen Z. And yes, it's worse than you may think. So we're going to think about the world or environment that Gen Z has been raised in. And so something I never really had an appreciation for was that the issues of the world are ever present for Gen Z, particularly because of social media. So I am a proud geriatric millennial. So I'm the top end of the millennial cohort. So I have a little bit of a vibe with the Gen X's and a little bit of a vibe with the millennials. And so when we think about world conflicts, I think for me personally, I think of like the Gulf War and then whatever the things that happened after 9/11. Those were things that were impactful, but we could tune in and tune out to them. I still had to go turn on the TV or turn on the radio to get updates about those conflicts, but I could tune out if I wanted to. And for those older ones who may be on this webinar, you may have had family members who were in world wars, and it might have taken weeks, if not months, to get a letter from the front from your relative. And so there was a gap in time between when you were getting information. And this generation doesn't have that experience. They are dealing with everything in real time. And not just, I just heard the story, but I have live streaming feed of the conflict coming into my phone. And this has been happening throughout their developmental years. What's also worth noting is that many have noted that when they try to kind of disengage from that type of content on their social media, that the algorithm would continue to send it to them anyway. So they can't disengage from it, and it feels all the time. And it can feel very heavy for them because they feel almost helpless to really get involved, because while it's far away, it's in the palm of their hands. Second aha moment I had when talking with Gen Z planners was that they haven't really grown up in an era where social figures of any sort were really worth respect. And this was an interesting thought for me, because for me growing up, and for many of you on this webinar, there was a level of deference that we offered to people who were in positions of authority, whether it was the mayor, whether it was the president, governor. If you had a title, there was a certain level, there was a certain way that I carried myself around you. There was a certain way I spoke to you. And when those figures were involved in some sort of salacious scandal or corruption, like that was a real like pearl clutch moment. Like, how dare they? It was shocking, and we were disappointed in them. But for Gen Z, it's the opposite. Scandal is normal. And so think about what that looks like for a young person when all of the people who are supposed to be making change in the world have been found, a lot of them have been found to be phony, corrupt, or predatory. How does that shift the way they think about authority, particularly coming into the office? In many cases, it means that they're looking for their leaders to earn their respect and not necessarily just assume it. And that is something for those of us from the older generations who might have a bit of difficulty with that. Another big aha, that the social systems and institutions that were in place for previous generations to kind of help them transition from the work from school to adulthood, A lot of those programs, they're scaled back, they're falling apart, or they no longer exist. So think about what fueled you going to work when you first started your planning career. Maybe it was to buy a car or a house. Maybe it was a new toy for your child. Maybe it was to go on a family vacation. Maybe it was to fund educational opportunities for your kids or take care of your aging parents. You were working with a goal in mind that was bigger than you. This next generation does have goals, but they're not fueled by those same life milestones. They, for many of them, owning a home, having children feels completely out of their reach. So just take a moment to think, how would you show up to work if you felt like tomorrow was not promised and like you really genuinely believe that? What if the life that you had growing up, regardless of what echelon you found yourself in, what if you truly felt that by going to work, you would still not be able to either replicate or level up your life in comparison to the one you had as a child? How would that affect your perspective, the energy, the focus that you would bring to work? Something to consider that I had never thought about until I started talking with more Gen Zs. Now, the next one is a big one, and I need everybody to lean in a little closer to their screen. Like, let's come closer. Let's connect on this one. Gen Z is the product of our making, and I just need you to sit with that for a sec. So it was the older generations that told Gen Z what not to put up with, and Gen Z is doing just that. So we told them, if it doesn't look right, it doesn't smell right, it doesn't act right, question it. And question it vigorously until you get an answer that makes sense. Don't blindly accept anything. We told them to challenge authority, but not thinking that one day we would be the authority that they would be challenging. We set a new bar of expectations for the children. We told them not to settle, that they were special, and that specialness needed to be celebrated and accommodated. And they were told to pursue their passions. They can do anything. But the reality is that most workplaces are struggling to meet that expectation that we have now engendered into the children. So think about this. What if your whole life you were told that you were special and you believed it? And you are special, but the thing that made you special was accommodated. Now you show up in the workplace and there's not that accommodation, and you sort of feel like the number, and you don't feel like an individual, and the expectation is that you're just going to fall in line with the rank and file norms that are within the office but are completely foreign to you. How would that go for you? Would that be an easy transition to make? And so what I want you to take away from this theme is that the struggle is relative. So often I hear people talking about Gen Z being entitled, they don't appreciate what they have, but they've grown up in an environment that is very different. It moves at a much faster clip than maybe the previous generations experienced. And so thematically, there are struggles that are the same across the generations, but it's the impact that is different. For previous generations, getting a house was something that seemed possible for many. Now it's impossible for most of Gen Z. And so we need to be attuned to the differences in experiences that are coming into the workplace. Okay, so next big theme. YOLO, or you only live once. And so this was a trending phrase for a while, and it was something that was coming up in my discussions. But as I was refining this presentation and giving it in different locations, me and my panel of Gen Zs were kind of like, we need to refine this, because YOLO kind of has a connotation of being like flippant, like who cares, throw it all away, let's live our best lives. And that's not totally what Gen Z is doing. So we've refined it to carpe diem. And we've chosen that because there's an intentionality with what Gen Z is doing. And that's what carpe diem kind of conveys a little bit more. Like, we're not just, yes, we're living for today, but there are things we want to get out of today. And it's not just throw everything in the air and just see what happens. So let's talk about this. So think about how you talk to your kids about work. Do they hear, I just came back from this great public meeting and there was lots of good dialogue. And I think we're going to have some great ideas to present council. Counselors were excited about it. This is going to be great. Or do they hear you like, oh, the public meeting, the people were screaming and throwing things. People were cursing. And I hate Bill in my office because he's always talking when he shouldn't be. I hate having to be in at 8. I'm going to have to stay late tomorrow. These are things that Gen Z has heard, not just from you, from their aunties, their uncles, their grandparents. They've heard the deathbed confessional from Pop, who, when he had all his family around him before he died and shared his lessons learned, he's heard, I wish I had spent more time with you. I wish I had followed my passions. I wish I hadn't worked so much. And so the thing that we need to really appreciate about Gen Z is that they are watching and they are listening. And because of that, they are not defined by what they do. And this is something that has been borne out in the recent trend report developed by APA, where they're forecasting that there is going to be a time where we shift away from our work being our identity, and that the things that we're interested in and passionate about will be the things that we talk about. So instead of saying, hi, my name is Lauren, I'm a planner, I might say that hi, my name is Lauren and I love fashion. And this will be a significant shift because a lot of us, whether we realize it or not, are kind of our identity is wrapped into what we do. And that is a significant shift. And that is what you're seeing in Gen Z today. They have lived in a world of constant uncertainty, so they're not going to run themselves ragged for a job that might fire them tomorrow. Every year, something has been automated in their world. So they're not lazy. They're about efficiency. And so, again, think about growing up in a purely digital world and then transitioning into some offices that are analog, like still doing everything by paper. If you want process improvements, you need to ask them because they don't want to spend 8 hours doing any task that could be completed in half that time. Again, they're used to things moving at a clip, and in some offices, they're just not there yet. So tap into that. They can help you. They want to get it done faster. They still want to do good work, but they want to get to the things that are important in life. And what they've seen, what we've modeled for them is that we've sacrificed the grand things in life, being with our family, doing things that we love, filling our cup for work, which sometimes doesn't fill up our cup. And so if there's nothing you take away from this particular section of the presentation, it's that their expectations and boundaries that they're bringing to the workplace are rooted in the lessons learned from us. And they are bringing them a lot sooner to the conversation about work than we did when we were coming into the profession. So I don't know about you, but I wasn't having a conversation about boundaries when I was 25. I was willing to go anywhere and do just about anything planning in order to start to build my resume. And that's not to say that Gen Z doesn't want to build their resume, but they're not going to build it at a cost of their connections or our next big topic, mental health. So this is the third big theme, and I really want to dive into this because this was the most kind of pivotal aha moments that I had. So the first thing that I need everyone to understand is if you're not quite there with mental health, it was the older generations who gave Gen Z the permission and the vocabulary to talk about their mental health. So there are words that some 5-year-olds learn. Anxiety is a word that is taught to them. It was not the word that I used when I was young. Maybe when I had that feeling would have said I'm nervous or I was uneasy. But anxiety is the conversation right now. And so previous generations always wanted better for their children. I don't want them to struggle and face the same obstacles I did. And if we had collectively come together to do that, that was actually a sign of progress. And so parents changed it up a little bit. They decided to break the cycle. They took a gentler approach to parenting. They started having conversations about feelings with their children, even though that might not have been a conversation that their parents had with them. And so many of the discomforts we experienced and the lessons that came along with that have been removed for Gen Z. So they don't have necessarily that same tolerance for certain stressors because, quite frankly, in some cases, they are experiencing that stressor as a 25-year-old for the first time because they're transitioning from school, where there's been a lot of accommodation, into the workplace where there's not that much. The older generations, we advocated in schools for programs and policy changes that acknowledged all the differences of every child, and everybody was going to be included, no child left behind. And none of those accommodations were bad. They were all very well intended. But then the expectation is that the workplace would and should be equally accommodating, which, quite frankly, we all know is not really the case. And there are still many in leadership who still expect Gen Z to pay their dues or suffer the way that they suffered when we first came into the profession, even though we've removed those hardships that caused the so-called resilience that we might have to some of these things. So it's kind of a mixed message. Like we want things to be better for you, but we want you to suffer like we suffered. Like they're not able to square that circle. Gen Z was not taught to hide their feelings. So if I wasn't able to do my poll and see how many Gen Xers that are in here, the feral generation, there's lots of us in this room who maybe just choked down our emotions. We figured it out ourselves and we turned out fine. So why can't they? Gen Z didn't grow up in a world of unspokens, unsaids. Have you watched social media lately? Everything is out in the open. There are some things that I see and I'm like, ooh, I would have probably kept that to myself. I don't know if I would have shared it with a million people, but that's the norm for Gen Z. If you know what a crash out is, if you don't, Google it. But Gen Z is full of emotion. And so something that you might have experienced or seen is a difference in emotional regulation. So for those of us who might have been told to be reserved or been, subtly told to be reserved or to keep that to yourself, don't talk about it. It's been the opposite for Gen Z. And so they want to talk about everything. Everything's on the table. If you ask, they'll probably tell you. And so that can be a little bit jarring if you've come from, like, for example, like the silent generation or even for boomers, where it's like, you're telling me, you're sharing with me more information than I feel is appropriate for me to have for you. They will protect their mental health at all costs. So there is another reason why you might hear more conversation about boundaries, or you may have experienced someone just stop showing up for work. They are willing to do the work, they want to do the work, but they're not going to give you any more or any less than they are expected to or compensated for. A lot of us probably did a lot of unpaid work in order to move ourselves up the chain. Gen Z is not necessarily interested in that. And I know that you may have experienced that already. I have, where it's like, yeah, if they're not needed for the public meeting, they're okay with that. They have other things planned already that they could do. So they're not coming in early, they're not staying late. And if they are staying late, they want you to tell them in advance so that they can negotiate the best things in life that they were going to be spending time doing in order to do more work. And they're going to want to be compensated for it. So it's very important for you to get very clear, I would say clear during the interview process about your expectations for your office and your team. One thing that was kind of universally expressed through all the interviews I was able to do was the desire for feedback and mentorship. Like they truly want to learn from your lessons because, quite frankly, a lot of them feel like the earth is going to be too hot to live on very shortly. So I don't have time to learn all the lessons. I need to learn from yours and mine. So give it to me. And so that's going to be something else. I see a lot of people talking about mentorship, and I love it. And I think a certain part of it comes from the fact that a lot of us didn't necessarily have a mentor coming into our profession. We had to figure it out ourselves. And so they want to learn from you, but they also do acknowledge that they are a little bit sensitive. And you may have experienced a time where you tried to give some Gen Z a feedback and it didn't go so well. There may have been a little bit more emotion than you were anticipated having to navigate. So keep in mind, whether you believe it or not, mental health isn't going anywhere, and neither are the conversations about it. So you need to prepare yourself to be able to have those conversations from a place of empathy, even though it might not totally resonate with you. That is what is they're going to be asking of you, and you're going to have to try to negotiate a way to give it to them. So let's wrap this up. What are the takeaways? We're talking a lot more than maybe people talked to us when we were their age, and we need to make time for it. So I need you to remember what you're telling your children. What did you tell them this morning when you dropped them off at school? What did you tell them when you dropped them off at university? They're listening to your advice, they're watching your behavior, and they're taking all of those lessons and bringing them into the working world a lot sooner than we did. So ask yourself, how can I prepare myself to adapt to this change? For a 25-year-old to tell me about their boundaries, like, huh? Yeah, it's a thing. So how are you going to get ready? Gen Z wants to do good work, but work is not the most important thing to them. It's a means to an end. They do want to work. They do want to have an impact on the world because the world feels like it's crumbling. And so where they can, they want to be in on the conversation. But they are about efficiency. So here's a tidbit. Tell them what they should do if they finish their tasks at the end of the day. Again, they're from a world of no unspokens. They're not going to read your mind and be like, "Oh, maybe I should do this research on this thing." If they have done the tasks that they are expected to do for the day and the tasks that they are compensated for that day, don't be surprised if you see them on their phone or maybe wanting to, take in an activity during that time. I've had those conversations too. You have to tell them what to do to fill their time. No one taught us those things. Well, I get it, but that does not give us a license to not teach the next generation. So it's not a matter of nobody did it for me, so I'm not going to do it for you. Again, we always want to do better. And so we need to continue to support them and be clear about what we want from them. Sharing your feelings, it's a thing. It's not going anywhere. They want that authenticity, even if it's, I'm not good with my feelings. Like, I have feelings, I don't know how to express them. And so if you're wanting them from me, it's just not something I'm there yet, but I'm going to try. Tell them that. They'll appreciate the authenticity of you being not a feelings person, and they will then adjust their expectations accordingly. We really need to start making time for feedback. And because of that emotional sensitivity and maybe a different level of emotional regulation, we need to ask them, what's the best way for me to give this to you in a way that you can receive it and not take it as a personal assault? They want to learn from your experience. Tell them when they're doing a good job and remind them that feedback is a means to better them, not to hurt them. And that when they shine, you shine. And so you are always concerned about ensuring that they are shining. And finally, just reiterating, your expectations have to be super clear. And the best way to do that is to invest in onboarding. Like, we have to get away from this, like, show up for your first day of work and, the admin will show you around, you'll find your desk and then figure it out. So you need to start pairing them with people who actually have the capacity to answer their questions. We already talked about how they've grown up asking questions and they expect an answer. And so don't pair them with the senior planner who's leading the town's zoning ordinance rewrite and who's in meetings all day and can't support that Gen Z and not only teaching them the how, but the why. Because if they don't get the answer to the why, they're not going to back down. And there's nothing worse that you could say is that like that's above your pay grade, or that's not information for you to know. Because again, in telling them to challenge authority, when you're not sharing with them, they're like, well, what are you hiding? So something to consider. Make sure that you're being clear with your expectations and explaining the why to the best of your ability. Yes, there are some things that are above their pay grade, and maybe it's more better to say that things are confidential. I can't share that with you, but here's what I can share with you. So things to consider. I hope that this presentation has given you some insight, something to think about. Again, if nothing else comes from this presentation, I want you to talk to the people in your office. Get to know them. Again, that's Manager 101. You got to lead, you got to know the people you're leading if you want your team to thrive. So I thank you for your attention. I thank you for joining us this afternoon, and happy to hear the dialogue and answer questions where I can.
Lauren, thank you so much. That was awesome. A really good presentation. Helps us all kind of frame Gen Z in the workplace. It was great when we had a little pre-discussion before this meeting. You're very direct and said, "So what year were you born?" And I think that's a that's a triggering question for me because the year I was born, really, I don't associate with how I feel and act. But
That's okay.
it was great to have that very clearly. You know, and you said you're a geriatric millennial. I guess I'm a baby millennial.
Okay.
And so it's interesting to hear a lot of these things, and I definitely relate to um, Gen Z is a product of what we told them to be.
Mhm.
They're doing exactly the things that we said they should. And as the father of two toddlers right now, I'm thinking
Mhm.
through that a lot more too. Of okay, what am I telling my 3-year-old and my 1.5-year-old, and we've got another one coming, and how is that going to translate? So I really appreciate those. Um, Right now, we don't have any live questions, and so I will just say to everybody, we've got 101 participants. Please do jump in to the Q&A and ask your questions. I've got a few that I'll get us started with,
Okay.
but I don't want it to be just you and me, Lauren, on this discussion, even though that will be great for me. I'll enjoy that.
Well,
Please,
Lucas, maybe they're in a bit of shock right now. I've kind of hit them with
that's right.
hit
That's
them
right.
with a lot,
So
and they're kind of spinning right now.
that's right. Here's a good one that just came
Okay.
in. Thank you, Maya. Do you notice any trends in how Gen Z show up to public meetings or planner specific roles?
Did I notice any trends? Uh, not so I didn't ask questions about their engagement in planning processes as because I was really focused on work. The one thing I will say, and I've noted it already, is that they are very passionate, and they all shared like they feel the weight of the world. And so becoming a planner was their way of trying to right the wrongs that they were hoping the older generations would address, but may not be addressing the way that they feel is appropriate. And so they are they want to be here, they want to do the work, they want to make a difference. And so that to me is heartening that even though they might think that the world might end tomorrow, they still want to make it the best world it can be today.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, they're pouring in now, so this is great.
Okay. They've come
Um,
out of the shock and they're ready.
that's right. I'm going to jump down. I'm assuming this is a question from someone in Gen Z, so I like the angle.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions for Gen Z employees who have a director or leader that isn't willing to do what it takes to connect with them?
Ooh, okay. So usually I have a slide for, hey, Gen Z, here's what you need to do. I took that out because I figured we were talking to managers and those in leadership. I think there's, as much as you are, Gen Z is looking for authenticity from their leaders, I think it's very important that you understand where your leaders are coming from. And so, quite frankly, it's hard to give something that you didn't give yourself. what wasn't given to you, sorry. And so it's very important for you to realize that maybe the thing that you're asking of your leader is like really, really out of their wheelhouse. And so you're going to have to find a way to kind of note that, ask them like, hey, tell me what it was like when you first started? Or what was the toughest public hearing you ever had? Like, what was that like? Like, you've got to build a rapport because quite frankly, for the other older generations, like they weren't necessarily sharers, particularly with the people that they worked with. And you would build relationships, yes, and you might share, but again, it was built on a relationship. It wasn't like just walk up to someone and say, hey, tell me all about your planning career. So you're going to have to kind of play the long game. And that's actually one of the sessions I'm proposing for MPC, is you're going to have to move a little bit at the speed of those you're working with. And that is, to me, the hardest transition for Gen Z, is because they're used, again, to moving at a clip. And older generations, they're not there yet. And it's going to take them a minute to get there. But don't not try. You're just going to have to be a little bit more persuasive or intuitive. Like you're gonna have to try to figure out what's your way in. Maybe it's asking about things that they like doing. Build the rapport, and then you might be able to go deeper.
All right, thank you. We've got a question from Brian. What role do you believe the pandemic played in Gen Z expectations of working? In particular, how does it relate to in-person, hybrid, and virtual work expectations?
That's a good question, and a poignant one actually, because from the Gen Zs that I've talked to, again, they're the top end of the cohort. They pretty much all acknowledge that the bottom end of their cohort, they feel is completely different. And that the Gen Zs who were maybe in university when the pandemic hit versus the Gen Zs who were in elementary school or middle school or high school, that it has had a significant impact on who they are and how they act. So it's almost like there's a divide within the generation of pre and post pandemic. So yes, there is a conversation about like, why do I have to be in person? Like, why? We were able to get through a lot of things virtually. And so, I mean, it's a question I ask myself, even as a manager sometimes who was ordered back to work full time. And so, yes, they're going to ask you about remote opportunities. And if there are none, I would encourage you all to be upfront at the beginning. And if you can explain why, that's great too. And yes, sometimes the answer is going to be because that's the council directive. And we do what council tells us to do. So the answer is not always going to be what they want, but I encourage you to be as transparent as possible because they are looking for it. They do appreciate the interpersonal connections that go with meeting in the office, but being in the office 5 days is something they just can't reconcile. So you need to be able to explain to them why that's necessary. And sometimes it's like, that's just the directive. Like some answers people don't like, but it doesn't mean they're not true.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. We've got several, so I'm going to try and rapid fire a couple of ones if you
Okay.
have quick answers. What about dress codes in an office
Ooh,
environment?
this one is a tough one because I had to deal with this in my last office where the organization had no dress code. And so there was me as a geriatric millennial who had a boomer mom who had an office job. So I watched her go to work in high heels and a suit. And so that was kind of, I got dressed up for work. And now I had no framework to actually require people to get dressed up for work.
Mm.
So dress codes are challenging because in many respects, depending on the organization, it reinforces certain gender norms that may not be part of the conversation socially now. And so I don't know how to answer the question of how I feel about dress codes because I like to get dressed up. I feel like I like to get dressed for the occasion. So if you ever ask me to go somewhere, I'm like, what's the vibe? Because I want to make sure that I'm like dressed for that. But that's me. Some people
Mhm.
would like to be in their athleisure all day.
Great.
I'm not one of those people. So you're going to have to move with the organization that you're with if there's an opportunity for you to talk about the dress code. But I guess for me, it's been about like the work to me is important, and I want to show that through the way that I dress. But I know everybody's not going to agree with that, and that's okay too.
That's right. I was going to say that sounds very organization specific, like you mentioned.
Yes.
Um, okay, we kind of touched on that. Um, two questions that are somewhat similar. One written a little more aggressively.
Ooh,
Um, the aggressive question is, so is the assumption that this is a one-way street, older workplace people have to adjust, but Gen Z doesn't?
no.
And then following that, in my experience, Gen Z wants feedback, but are defensive when they get the feedback. Um, what do we think?
So no, this is not a one-way street. And both sides have challenges. So I can share some of the tips that Gen Z need. Like when we gave this present, when I gave this presentation to a larger audience, I usually throw in here, Gen Z, here's some things that you need to be mindful of. Like one is like you can't just walk in and expect to dismantle the system. Like systems are in place for a reason, they serve certain purposes. And so you need to understand the system before you attempt to dismantle it. But for the older generations that are in the workplace, yes, you're going to have to adjust because you're not going to be able to work forever. Or maybe in your mind you think you are. Like you're eventually going to have to pass the torch on to the next generation. And so yeah, if you want to be able to bring them into your organization, and again, to the question I asked at the beginning, like what happens if you don't? If you don't change, what happens? Like, does everybody just work until they're 80? Like at some point, something is going to have to shift because you're going to maybe want to provide different services if you're in the public sector, or expand the offerings that your consultancy provides, and you're going to need new technologies and new ideas and people to navigate those. So it's a question back to you of like, again, what happens if you don't change and just keep doing what you've always done? Are you going to get the same result? Isn't that the definition of insanity, to keep doing something the same and then expecting a different result?
That's
Something to
right.
think about.
Yeah. And like you said, that goes for both sides.
Both sides.
For both people in that situation. So
But yes, there's a power dynamic that's involved, and that's why those who are in leadership are in a place to actually shift things and make things different, whereas the Gen Zs are coming in and they're shifting things by just saying no. So they just might not take your offer. You might have difficulty with recruiting if there's not some leeway, some way to adjust to the needs of the current generation.
perfect. How do we effectively disseminate this information that we've all learned today with people who are in senior management that may be stubborn or resisting changing their approach or whatever the way is, because the way we've always done things is the way we should always do things, even though we're not happy with the way things are happening.
So true. So how to affect, so uh, someone asked me a similar question, and to me, you can't change someone who doesn't want to change, but you can model the change that you want to see. And so I don't know that it's necessarily like, here, let's pass Lauren's presentation off to my director and hopefully he'll get it. It's about you showing up in a way that shows that you're acknowledging that this generation needs something different and that you want to provide that. And so it's about modeling the behavior. Um, I would totally encourage you to have a conversation and maybe share some of the aha moments you had in this session. I hope you had at least one with your manager and director, and talk about what you're going to do differently. Start with you. Don't think like, John, you need to stop yelling at people, and you need to you need to start coming from a place of empathy. That John might not be there yet, but you can be there, and that's the only thing that you really have control over. So if you I don't know that systemic change is just gonna come through this presentation. I hope it does, but it's gonna come one planner at a time, showing up differently in each space.
That's great. There was one I wanted to follow up on and kind of just be a little bit of a closing. But just a comment that I had on some of these things. My management experience is not extremely lengthy in tenure, but in my brief tenure of being a manager, I have experienced just as many people in Generation X or Boomer generation who don't do their jobs well than I have others. And it's not just I think
Yes,
there's a lot of
yes,
there's a lot
those darn
of
kids.
yeah, there's a lot of narrative out there, I think, about, well, millennials don't want to go to work. Gen Z doesn't want to go to work. They don't want to work hard. They don't want to do things. I think there's just people. Some people
Yes,
don't want to work hard. Some people do want to work hard. And we have to navigate how people can work well and effectively. And
yes.
that has always been different for every generation in all time. I think one of the things I say often is that every old generation has always said, those darn kids. And every old
Hmm.
generation has always said, well, back in the good old day. And I think
Hmm.
really what's happening is that as every generation of humans gets older, our perspective changes. And it changes along the same group as all of our peers and people our same age. And I think as long as people are different ages, we're always going to say those same things. And when we get
Yes.
old, we will certainly be saying those darn kids.
Those darn kids. I see
And
some
back in the
other,
good old day,
yeah, exactly. When I
when
was young,
we were listening to Taylor
yeah,
Swift and the Backstreet
exactly.
Boys.
When I was listening to music on my iPod,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. So I think we all have to just be very cognizant of that. Thank you again, Lauren, so much. I want to be super cognizant of our time too
Mhm.
on today's webinar. I know there's some questions we didn't specifically get to
Yes, I see
about
them.
some compensation and
Yeah,
things
that was a
like
good one.
that. And there's good questions there. Please reach out to your coworkers, your peers, your colleagues. Please find Lauren on
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
find me on LinkedIn. I
Um,
will
and
provide support to
yeah,
managers and directors because I'm one of you. I get it.
perfect. Yeah,
As well as for Gen Zs to help you understand how to manage that transition. So feel free to reach out.
absolutely. I am posting one more time in the chat the CM link for this session. So please get that. If you're not a member of City Planning and Management, we encourage you to join the division. Even if you're not a member, please follow our social media page, LinkedIn, things like that. There will be more of these. We're going to try and have a live from Detroit session if it gets accepted for NPC next year. Otherwise, we will hope to see you all on our next webinar in a few months.
All
Thank you
right.
so much, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yes, please feel to reach out. I love talking about this topic.
Awesome.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you,
Thank
Lucas,
you.
for moderating this.
Absolutely. Y'all
See you
have a
later,
good day.
everybody.